What's up everyone, Piscean here. In this video I want to talk about the incompatibility of the sexes. And I know that sounds crazy, you're going to be like, girl, you were on testosterone for 7 months, what do you know? That means I know quite a bit. I've had a lot of guys and I've dealt with a lot of men in my life that were just whoa. But I've also had women that were also, dealing with crazy stuff. So I'm going to make this video, and it's not biased because I had DeepSeek help me write it. Maybe DeepSeek is biased, but DeepSeek AI helped me make this. The abyss between a philosophical and anthropological inquiry into the fundamental incompatibility of the sexes. This just amazes me as a Pisces stellium, Libra moon in the 6th, Taurus rising, fixed star, Algol conjunct my ascendant. I like to rile people up. That isn't, a bad thing. I think people need that fire under their ass. Anyways, before we get started, please like, subscribe, comment, share if you dare and care. With peace and love, I appreciate every single one of you. This dissertation argues that the perceived compatibility between human females and males is a historically contingent, culturally mandated illusion that obscures a deeper structural incompatibility. Drawing on existential philosophy, feminist phenomenology, evolutionary anthropology, and cross-cultural ethnography. The theses contend that the two sexes are constituted through divergent embodied projects, conflicting reproductive interests, and incommensurable symbolic positions. Rather than a complementary harmony, the relation between the sexes is characterized by ontological tension, strategic exploitation, and ritualized management of an irreconcilable alterity. The modern romantic ideal of the compatible couple is deconstructed as an ideological apparatus that masks a primordial sex antagonism. The dissertation concludes that genuine compatibility is not a natural given, but a fragile, ongoing achievement that perpetually collapses back into the fundamental asymmetry of being sexed. The human condition is what it all comes back to, and you can't escape it unless you are dead. All right, we're going to talk about a lot of things in this video, so we're going to go over 6 different parts, all right? So this is what we'll talk about. We have quite a bit, so I'm just going to go over these chapters with you. First, I want to talk about the compatibility question, first of all. That's our introduction. And then in chapter 2, or section 2, that's part of it, we're going to look at the philosophical construction of sex to antagonism. We're going to look at the metaphysics of the will, Schopenhauer's War of the Sexes, Nietzsche's Abyss, Eros as power struggle, Beauvoir and the existential asymmetry of subject and other, Erigeri and the non-composable sexuate worlds. In section 3, we're going to go over anthropological evidence, the universal management of sexual conflict, the traffic in women, and the structuralist reduction of complementarity, sexual segregation, avoidance, and ritualized hostility, the myth of man the hunter, and the division of incompatible labors. Now let's talk about section 4, which is evolutionary roots of incompatibility, sexual conflict theory, genetically optimal exploitation, divergent reproductive strategies and emotional discord, the origin of deception and cryptic estrus as strategies of evasion. We're going to talk about the modern myth of compatibility and its discontents, as well as the conclusion, living with the abyss, and a bibliography. So, I think we're all jealous of each other in one way or another. It's sad to say, but the world we're living in, that's just the reality. So let's begin with our introduction here, because I kind of tell us what I'm trying to get at with this entire video. The compatibility question is what I'm getting at. So to ask whether human females and males are compatible is to question a foundation so deeply embedded in social life that the very act of interrogation appears perverse. Compatibility is presupposed by marriage, romantic love, family formation, and cohabitation. Yet a rigorous examination of the philosophical and anthropological record reveals a startling counter-narrative. Human societies across time and space have devoted enormous symbolic and institutional energy not to expressing a natural harmony between the sexes, but to managing a pervasive, structural antagonism. This dissertation argues that compatibility is an ideological construct designed to paper over an abyss constituted by existential asymmetry, divergent evolutionary imperatives, and irreducible phenomenological difference. Methodologically, the study adopts an interdisciplinary hermeneutics. From philosophy, it retrieves the tradition of sexual pessimism, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Beauvoir, Irigaray, that posits an originary rift. From anthropology, it uses cross-cultural comparison. Levi Strauss, Rubin, Ortner, Strathern, to demonstrate that universal structures of segregation, exchange, and ritual hostility indicate fundamental incompatibility, not complementarity. From evolutionary biology, it integrates sexual conflict theory. Travers, Parker, Arnquist, and Rao to show that male and female genetic interests systematically diverge, resulting in an arms race of exploitation and resistance at every level from gamete to social institution. The combined force of these perspectives compels the conclusion that sexes are not naturally suited for harmonious coexistence. Their compatibility is a precarious, often violent, cultural achievement that perpetually fails. Divorce rates are high as fuck. The argument proceeds in 5 parts, and you have a lot of men killing their wives. Chapter 2 excavates the philosophical genealogy of sexual antagonism. Chapter 3 reads the ethnographic archive as a record of incompatibility management. Chapter 4 locates the biological substrate of conflict and evolutionary dynamics. Chapter 5 critiques the modern romantic ideology of the compatible couple as a particularly unstable fiction. The conclusion reflects on the ethical and existential implications of acknowledging the abyss. Let's begin with the philosophical construction of sex antagonism, the metaphysics of the will, Schopenhauer's War of the Sexes. Arthur Schopenhauer, in his notorious essay on women, 1851, and Throughout the World as Will and Representation, articulated a metaphysics in which sexual love is a delusion of the individual in service of the species will. Beneath the veneer of romantic attraction lies a blind, relentless urge to procreate. For Schopenhauer, man and woman are deceived into coupling by the genius of the species, which cares only for the production of the next generation. Once the reproductive goal is achieved, the illusion evaporates, and the fundamental incompatibility of their natures reemerges. Schopenhauer's misogyny is well documented, but his deeper insight is ontological. The sexes are will manifestations oriented toward different and ultimately conflicting ends. Man, driven by a less discriminating sexual impulse, seeks quantity of offspring and hence multiple partners, and woman, tasked with gestation and child-rearing, demands provision and security. This divergence means that their desires are never genuinely aligned, but rather temporarily intersect at a point of mutual exploitation. Compatibility is not a meeting of persons, but a momentary coordination of blind biological vectors. The subsequent disillusion and conflict are not failures of love, but the truth of the relation finally revealed. Schopenhauer's pessimism thus lays the first stone. Incompatibility is not a corrigible accident, but the very structure of sexual desire. Nietzsche's abyss, Eros as power struggle. Friedrich Nietzsche radicalized the vision of the sexes as locked in a perpetual war that no peace treaty can resolve. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the famous dictum, "You go to women, do not forget the whip," is less a literal injunction than a confession of the abyssal fear and hostility that structures the encounter. Nietzsche saw the relation between man and woman as a contest of wills, each seeking to impose their own will to power upon the other. Love for Nietzsche is a sublime form of appropriation and overcoming. It wants the unconditional sole possession of the longed-for person, the gay science. This desire for possession is inherently conflictual because two sovereign wills cannot simultaneously possess each other without annihilation. Crucially, Nietzsche recognized that this struggle is asymmetrical, and beyond good and evil, he contrasts the masterly nature of man's will with the scepticism and insurrectionary streak of woman's. Woman's power lies in dissimulation, in the eternal feminine that is a mask of submission beneath which operates a ruthless will to control. The sexes thus speak different moral languages, okay? So, masculine morality of command and creation, feminine morality of cunning and preservation. Any apparent harmony is a temporary unstable truce in an ongoing power struggle. For Nietzsche, the incompatibility is not a flaw, but the very condition that makes the erotic encounter profound. To pretend it is a concord of souls is to lie sentimentally. Beauvoir and the existential asymmetry of subject and other. Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex provides the most sophisticated philosophical articulation of sexual incompatibility as an existential structure. Her famous thesis, "Woman is defined as the other relative to the masculine subject," means that the two sexes do not meet as symmetrical reciprocal freedoms. The category of woman is a male construct that traps actual woman in eminence, while men reserve transcendence for themselves. Because men posits himself as the essential self-determining subject, he can only relate to woman as the inessential object. I've actually been called a sex object, a sex toy by my ex, who is a transvestite, and got me on board with it. The mediatrix between himself and nature, a relation of authentic reciprocity, is structurally impossible within this ontological framework. Beauvoir details how this asymmetry poisons every dimension of heterosexual intimacy. In love, the woman seeks to lose herself in the male subject to make him her absolute, while the man demands that she remain a reflection of his glory without making demands on his freedom. The result is a war of the sexes that is not a symmetrical conflict but a deformed dyad, where woman's subjectivity is perpetually denied. Even the most tender sexual act is haunted by the master-slave dialectic. He desires to possess a freedom that, once possessed, ceases to be free. She desires a liberation that can only come by making herself an object for his desire. The incompatibility lies in the impossibility of a we that does not subsume one freedom under another. For Beauvoir, true compatibility would require the abolition of the sex otherness itself, a revolutionary horizon still unrealized and perhaps unrealizable given the deep history of its embodiment and how long the patriarchy's been going on, ever since the beginning of human history. Men have always been seen as a superior, we know this. Irrigari in the non-compossible sexuate worlds. Luce Irrigari deepens the existential rift into a claim about the very structure of language, body, and world. In this sex which is not one, and an ethics of sexual difference, she argues that Western culture is built on a single masculine symbolic order that erases feminine morphology and subjectivity. The sex which is not one, woman's sex, with its multiple non-unified erogenous zones, does not map onto the phallic logic of subject-object, one and other. Male and female are not complementary halves of a whole. They inhabit incommensurable phenomenological worlds. Irrigari's concept of sexual difference is not about biological traits, but about an ontological interval, a separation that can never be bridged without violence. The sexes do not share a common measure. Their temporalities, spatialities, and modes of touch are radically distinct. Man's desire tends toward the mastering gaze, the solid, the defined. Woman's desire is fluid, tactile, diffuse. Any attempt to unite them under a single libidinal regime, the regime of the same, obliterates the feminine. Compatibility in Irrigari's framework would require a mutual recognition of this unbridgeable interval, an ethics of the not touching that preserves the other's irreducible alterity. But such an ethics has never been instituted historically. Instead, we have the heterosexual relation, which is a patriarchal imitation of a relation that covers over the absence of real relation. The sexes, in their current symbolic constitution, are non-compossible. The world of one is the destruction of the world of the other. Irrigari's work implies that genuine compatibility is a futural project requiring a rethinking of being itself, but the historical record shows only the failure to encounter the other as other. Anthropological evidence, the universal management of sexual conflict. Philosophical pessimism finds overwhelming empirical support in the ethnographic record. Cross-cultural anthropology reveals not a picture of natural harmony, but a vast array of mechanisms for managing sexual antagonism. The thesis of complementarity of the sexes, once popular in functionalist anthropology, has been decisively critiqued as an ideological projection masking structural male-dominance and chronic conflict. Traffic in women and structuralist reduction of complementarity. Claude Levi-Strauss and the elementary structures of kinship identified the incest prohibition and the exchange of women as the foundational act of human culture. For Levi-Strauss, the traffic in women constitutes society by forging alliances between groups of men. Woman is the ultimate scarce resource, a sign exchange in a system that generates social meaning. The crucial implication drawn out by Gail Rubin in her classic essay, The Traffic in Women, is that the relation between individual men and women is always already mediated by a patriarchal kinship system that positions the sexes in fundamentally incompatible social roles. Woman is a conduit of alliance between male lineages. Her desires and agency are systematically subordinated to the structural function. The supposed complementarity of male and female roles like hunter-warrior versus gatherer-nurturer is thus revealed as a political economy of sex. Men exchange women, women do not exchange men. The compatible domestic unit is a node in a system of male homosocial bonds. The structural asymmetry generates a permanent tension. The woman experiences her position as one of subjugation and resistance, while the man experiences it as a right to which he is entitled. The household is not a haven of compatibility, but a microcosm of the structural conflict. As the extensive literature on domestic violence, marital rape, and witchcraft accusations often targeting women who transgress male authority demonstrates. Anthropologists like Sherry Ortner, is female to male as nature is to culture, showed how this asymmetry is cosmologically grounded in a universal devaluation of the female-associated natural domain relative to the male-identified cultural one. Complementarity is thus a mystification. The lived reality is a hierarchical opposition that precludes authentic mutuality. Let's talk about sexual segregation, avoidance, and ritualized hostility. If the sexes were compatible, one would expect their social lives to tend toward easy integration. Instead, a vast number of societies institutionalize rigorous sexual segregation, strict avoidance taboos, and even ritualized expressions of hostility between men and women. In many Melanesian societies, for example the Itoro, Zambia, beliefs about sexual pollution dictate that men and women sleep separately, eat separately, and limit contact to the minimum necessary for procreation. Male initiation cults are built around the need to purge boys of feminine contamination and inculcate a militant masculine identity in opposition to the maternal world. Among the Munduruku of Amazonia, documented by Yolanda and Robert Murphy, men and women live in separate houses and maintain a state of chronic low-intensity antagonism, with women collectively mocking male pretensions and men asserting their superiority through ritual. The mythologies of such peoples explicitly narrate a primordial time when women dominated and were overthrown by men, after which the current segregation and suspicion became the permanent order. These patterns are not exotic exceptions, but extreme expressions of a logic present in attenuated form everywhere. Mediterranean honor and shame societies segregate the sexes to control female sexuality, which men experience as a threatening, polluting force that can destroy lineage honor. Veiling, purdah, and the symbolic opposition between the public male sphere and the private female sphere all manifest a deep cultural conviction that the uncontrolled mixing of the sexes is socially dangerous. Even in modern secularized contexts, the resurgence of gender-based political polarization, the battle of the sexes in media, and the proliferation of online intergender hostility replicate the same ritualized antagonism through new means. Segregation rituals are technologies of managing an incompatibility so fundamental that co-presence threatens the social order. The myth of the man the hunter, and the division of incompatible labors. So evolutionary anthropology long promoted the man the hunter, woman the gatherer model as a complementary economic partnership that forged the human family. More recent research has decisively complicated this picture. The division of labor by sex is not a harmoniously negotiated arrangement, but a contested boundary often imposed by male coalitions. Even in foraging societies where women contribute the majority of calories, like gathered foods, men's hunting serves not primarily to provision the family, but to gain prestige, attract mates, and solidify male alliances. The so-called show-off hypothesis clock suggests that men hunt big game for social signaling, not household utility, creating a systematic conflict of interest between male status seeking and female nutritional security. Women's gathering, meanwhile, provides a reliable, independent subsistence base that renders them less dependent on male provisioning, a situation often resisted by men who seek to control female labor and sexuality, which seems to be a lot of men. Like, that's why we even have Roe v. Wade. It shouldn't even be a fucking argument, but it is. Women not having the ability to defend themselves in a variety of ways for a plethora of the majority of human history. The result is that the economic integration of the sexes is not a seamless web, but a site of strategic divergence. Women's economic activities and men's are often oriented toward different incommensurable goals, leading to conflict over resource allocation, time budgets, and reproductive decisions. In agricultural and industrial societies, this divergence becomes institutionalized in the public-private split and the gender wage gap. The domestic unit, far from an efficient common enterprise, is better understood as a battlefield of the household economy in which male and female strategies are in tension. Anthropologists like Collier and Rosaldo show that marriage itself is a package of rights traded between men, with the wife's labor and sexuality central stakes. Compatibility of purpose is always a forced compromise, if not an outright fiction. Right. Evolutionary roots of incompatibility. The philosophical and anthropological rift has a deep biological infrastructure illuminated by sexual conflict theory. Darwinian fitness is not a joint couple metric. It is an individual measure that creates a fundamental divergence of genetic interest between males and females. Okay? Let's talk about sexual conflict theory, genetically optimal exploitation. So, Robert Trivers' parental investment theory, which is from 1972, provided the first rigorous framework, which is the sex that invests more in offspring, typically females and mammals, due to gestation and lactation, becomes a limiting resource for the sex that invests less. This asymmetry creates a systematic conflict over mating and reproduction. Males are selected to maximize mating opportunities, while females are selected to be choosy and extract maximum investment. Okay? These strategies are not complementary but antagonistic. What is optimal for one sex's fitness often reduces the fitness of the other. Sexual conflict is now recognized as a ubiquitous evolutionary phenomenon, ranging from molecular arms races and seminal fluid proteins, which can manipulate female physiology against her interests, to behavioral coercion and infanticide in primates. So who's really getting the damage done to them? Women or men? Or both of us? All of us. It's not a competition. It's just biological reality. You know? Our genes and our DNA. So, in humans, this translates into a permanent underlying tension. Okay, so why? Male sexual psychology is shaped by selection for relatively lower thresholds of sexual arousal, greater desire for variety, and a tendency to overperceive female sexual interests, traits that facilitate opportunistic mating but frequently clash with female preferences for commitment and selectivity. Female sexual psychology, with its cryptic ovulation and extended sexuality, likely evolved in part as a counter-strategy to obscure paternity and retain male investment. The very biology of human mating is a record of millions of years of evolutionary warfare, not of harmonious coadaptation. So, the experience of romantic attraction itself can be reinterpreted as a proximate psychological mechanism evolved to bring together two organisms whose ultimate interests will inevitably diverge the moment conception occurs. Okay? Divergent reproductive strategies and emotional discord. This is very important to me. So, the emotional lives of the sexes reflect this deep strategic divergence, all right? Cross-cultural data collected by David Buss and others show universal sex-differentiated mate preferences. So men consistently value youth and physical attractiveness, cues of fertility, while women consistently value resources, status, and ambition, cues of provisioning capacity, okay? So these preferences are inherently conflictual because why? They orient desire toward different and often mutually exclusive qualities, okay? A man's pursuit of multiple short-term sexual opportunities directly threatens a woman's need for reliable investment. And that's why we're seeing the rise of polyamory. That's a Pluto and Aquarius thing right there. The rise of transvestites, that's Pluto and Aquarius. Neptune and Aries. Fucking Uranus and Gemini. This all makes perfect sense. It absolutely makes sense why men are falling into this trap of gooning and porn and jerking off every day. But somehow women are in trouble when they want an abortion, but a man can jerk off every day and lose all his spermatozoa, which is billions and billions of unborn babies, by the way. Jerk off and come on whatever he wants to. Isn't that disgusting when you really think about it? But it's men, so it's okay. Anyways, a woman's hypergamous preference for high-status men leaves the majority of men sexually and romantically frustrated. Now, this generates a structural conflict of emotional interest that no amount of goodwill can erase. This is why you see so many people like in Gen Z, and you're going to see Gen Alpha, there's the lonely epidemic. Nobody really wants to go out and have friends or even be in a relationship because everyone just argues and there's political views and differs and bullshit everywhere you go. Today's world is just arguments, arguments, arguments. Drama, drama, drama. In the land of, oh my God, it's always something. Go fuck yourself. I will. Okay. But yeah, so I'm a fucking feminist. And I didn't even know I was a radical feminist who would be leading on being a true patriot, because I was born in America, even though I'm a black woman. And I dealt with that testosterone hormone replacement bullshit. I had to figure it out the hard way, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And now I have it figured out. So, the high rates of marital infidelity, sexual jealousy, and relationship dissolution across societies are not aberrations, but predictable outcomes of these conflicting evolved psychologies. Jealousy. I talked about this in my last video. Men are jealous of women. Why do you want to be a woman so bad? Yes, we're jealous of you too. That's why we're given testosterone and we're being put on hormones to try and be like you. We need to stop mocking each other. This shit needs to stop. And I'll say this, it has been a more male thing because way back when in the Bible, they wrote about eunuchs. I don't care which version of the Bible you read, they wrote about eunuchs. The story of Gomorrah and homosexuals, and there's literature from way back in the day where men were having men dress up as women, wear this skirt, wear this dress, and they think they're in power when they do so, and they rape you. So if that's what you want your life to look like, is that really you're fulfilling your ego and your natal promise? I mean, it's fulfilling your ego for sure, but your natal promise is a whole different story. In fact, I'd say you're debilitating your chart, you're ruining your natal chart when you act out in ways that the universe knows is unhealthy for you. And that's why we see the rise in HIV/AIDS in the 1980s when people kept on, doing what they did. And we'll see another epidemic of that, and maybe further sexual diseases going on. But anyways, jealousy itself is sexually dimorphic, meaning men's jealousy is more triggered by sexual infidelity, threatening paternity certainty, while women's is more triggered by emotional infidelity, threatening resource diversion. So these asymmetrical sensitivities mean that the partners experience the same relationship violation in fundamentally different and mutually incomprehensible ways, escalating conflict. Okay? So the very emotions that supposedly bind the couple, which is love, desire, jealousy, that's one of the things that's supposed to keep you in the relationship, but not nowadays. You have your polyamory, are precisely the sites where incompatibility manifests most acutely. Now I want to talk about the origin of deception and cryptic estrus as strategies of evasion. So a key evolutionary innovation in the hominine line may have been the concealment of ovulation, or cryptic estrus, and the emergence of continuous female sexual receptivity. Far from being an adaptation for pair bonding harmony, this can be read as a female counter strategy against male control of reproduction. because that's, like I just mentioned, Roe v. Wade. Men love to control women. By obscuring the time of fertility, ancestral females gained a measure of freedom to mate with multiple males, confuse paternity, and reduce the risk of infanticide by making multiple males potential fathers. Okay. This created a selection pressure on males to guard mates, monitor fertility signs, and sequester female sexuality, a classic arms race. Continuous sexual availability also allowed females to extract ongoing material benefits from males in exchange for sexual access, a dynamic that set the stage for the economic sexual exchange that anthropologists describe as universal. Thus, the very biological traits often celebrated as the foundation of human romantic love, prolonged sexuality, emotional bonding, concealed fertility, evolved in a crucible of strategic deception and counter-deception. Compatibility is a cultural overlay that tries to make a cooperative narrative out of an evolutionary history of exploitation and evasion. Okay? Onto the modern myth of compatibility and its discontents. Modern Western society, particularly since the rise of romantic love ideology in the 18th and 19th centuries, has invested heavily in the notion of the compatible couple as a meeting of souls, an elective affinity based on mutual understanding, shared values, and emotional intimacy. This ideology replaced earlier models of marriage as a practical alliance or a religious sacrament, promised that the abyss between the sexes could be bridged by love, communication, and psychological insight. The historical trajectory from the Enlightenment to the 21st century, however, can be read as a prolonged failed experiment in this myth. The introduction of no-fault divorce, the sexual revolution, and the economic independence of women were supposed to purify the couple by stripping away external coercions and leaving only authentic compatibility. Instead, they exposed the fragility of the construct. Divorce rates soared and then stabilized at high levels. 7-year itch became a cliche. The rise of the internet age gave birth to an entire discourse, manosphere, radical feminist critique of heterosexuality, gender wars, in which the sexes often depict each other as fundamentally unfathomable, exploitative adversaries, the intense cultural obsession with red flags, attachment styles, even look-smaxing. Therapeutic communication can be interpreted as a desperate, ever more elaborate ritual apparatus designed to manage the incompatibility that refuses to disappear between males and females, XY, XX chromosomes. Moreover, the modern demand that the romantic partner fulfill roles once distributed across an entire community, lover, best friend, co-parent, economic partner, spiritual companion, creates an impossible burden. The expectation of total compatibility, is the very thing that guarantees its failure. The more one demands from the heterosexual couple, the more the structural antagonism reasserts itself, and there's a lot of built-up resentment. Contemporary phenomena such as the sex recession and the rising prevalence of single-person households may be seen not as failures of the sexes to get along, but as a rational withdrawal from an arena of chronic conflict, universal collective conflict. The myth of compatibility has proven so taxing that increasing numbers of people are choosing to opt out of the heterosexual dyad entirely, seeking emotional fulfillment elsewhere or in isolation. Most people are just jerking off, watching a lot of porn, and that's why you hear them say they're gooners, and it's disgusting, but it's the world we're living in. So, we're going to conclude with living with the abyss. Dissertation has argued that the compatibility of females and males is an ungrounded ideological construct that obscures a fundamental multi-layered incompatibility. Philosophically, the sexes are constituted as asymmetrical existential projects, one as subject, the other as other, inhabiting incommensurable symbolic worlds. Anthropologically, the universal apparatuses of sexual segregation, ritualized hostility, and the exchange of women betray a deep social need to manage the conflict that constantly threatens to erupt. Evolutionarily, male and female organisms are locked in a genetic arms race in which cooperation is always a temporary, fragile truce. The modern romantic ideal, far from resolving the tension, has made it more acute by raising expectations to an impossible pitch. To acknowledge this incompatibility is not to endorse misogyny or misanthropy, nor to call for the abolition of all heterosexual relations. It is rather to adopt a stance of radical realism, just as Schopenhauer counseled the denial of the will as a path to peace. A philosophical anthropology of the sexes might counsel a clear-eyed recognition of the abyss. We might lower the stakes. The institutions that bring men and women together, marriage, cohabitation, romance, might be reconceived not as expressions of natural harmony, but as civilizational achievements of containment. akin to diplomacy between perpetually rival powers. A more honest culture would stop asking men and women to be each other's everything and would instead cultivate forms of relation that do not demand the impossible merging of two discontinuous worlds. Perhaps the only ethical relation between the sexes is one that respects the interval, and not touching the irreducible alterity that Irigaray envisioned. This would mean abandoning the fantasy of the fusional couple, embracing a more modest, less totalizing form of coexistence, an armed neutrality leavened by moments of careful tenderness, always aware that the other is an ultimate stranger. The anthropological record suggests that such a stance has always been latent in the segregation taboos and avoidance rituals. What remains is to bring it into conscious, philosophically lucid practice. To live with the abyss, rather than pretend to bridge it, may be the beginning of wisdom. With peace and love, thank you for watching this video. Piscean out.